Well, good morning, friends. This is Mr. Montgomery. Happy Easter. I'm here trying to get out another chapter for you on Chapter 12, Organization and Support. I'm trying to get as many of these chapters done before you have to do your presentation so it can give you insight and guidance and suggestions and help for developing and presenting a great speech. So this chapter is, even though it sounds boring, it's very important, and I actually enjoy teaching this portion of the idea of speaking in public speeches. So we're going to break it into this first part of structuring your speech, and this is thinking of outlines. We're going to use outlines for our speeches in three different formats. And the speech outlines, they are going to help you both put your thoughts together initially, as well as help you in delivering your speech at the end of the run here. So they talk about three different types of speeches. First of all, a working outline. I don't know if I would call it an outline. It's more of a worksheets, initial ideas, strategies. You're going to write things down. You're going to move things around. Maybe what you had on page 3 is now going to be on page 1, but it's more of worksheets, and it's for your eyes only. It's just your initial ideas. You know, the picture on the opposite side of this screen, that young lady there is moving her pages around, which is a great way of looking at a working outline. It's not even close to being the final product. The second item, what they talk about, is a formal outline, or what it's called in other textbooks, a preparation outline. This outline, as it says, helps you to put all the right parts in all the right places. I think without knowing it, I stole that from Meghan Trainor in one of her songs, but it is exactly right. It's a formal outline in that it's typed, 12-point font, Times New Roman, correct spelling, correct grammar, proper use of the three parts of the introduction, the body, and the conclusion, use of transitions, but it's all there, very complete. You're not going to use this outline to present your speech. You are going to do it to help get you ready to present it. So that's why we call it a preparation outline. And you're going to write everything in full sentences, proper punctuation, write it as you would say it, one sentence per point. We don't have anything in parentheses because parentheses kind of implies it's more of a written document. Remember, this is going to be a spoken document that it represents, so you don't put anything in parentheses. In some formats like APA, you'll put like Smith, 241 at the end of a sentence in parentheses, but here we would work that content directly into our presentation. Well, then the third type is what's called a speaking outline or speaking notes. And this is what you would take with you in your presentation, whether to the lectern or in front of the camera for this speech in this class for this semester. And you only want enough there to remind you of what you're going to say. It's based on a lot of practicing, and the danger of bringing up more is that the more you bring up, the more you will be tempted to read your content. So we want good eye contact with the audience. We don't want to be reading a speech to them. That's more of a manuscript approach we talked about already, or we're going to talk about. And so only enough to get by, but it's based on lots and lots and lots of practice. So you don't need those notes. You're not dependent on them. Okay, so let's talk about principles of outlining a speech. Now, in this section, we're going to look at symbols, format, rule of division, rule of distinction, rule of parallel wording, and rule of balance. You'll notice from the textbook, I've added a couple of my own in here, but I think they're just as important, and maybe the text covers them in other ways, but I put them here. Okay, so a key principle is to remember that when you're presenting, we are audience-centered. That is, we are thinking it's not so much me giving a speech, it is me sharing information or ideas or concepts with an audience. And so not whatever I have to do to get by and finish this thing, but what do I have to do? What can I do that helps it more memorable and meaningful and enjoyable and valuable to my audience? How can I shape my speech to provide that for them? And so keep that in mind all the way through. So I've drawn some wonderful drawings here for you to grab some concepts, and hopefully it will make sense. I would have done this on the board in the classroom, but here, a marker board for my wife's office. So you see the top bubble, or the top kind of cloud with little clouds in it, some arrows pointing down to 3 bowls or baskets labeled 1, 2, and 3 with lines between them, and then a lower 2 baskets, one big one and one smaller one next to it. So think about that concept, and I'm going to break this down. So that cloud at the top is kind of the gathering of all of the research that you've done for your speech. It's the magazine articles, the books, the interviews, the videos you watched on YouTube or elsewhere, and it's a gathering of all your notes and thoughts and ideas into one big cloud of research and data and information. The smaller clouds in the bigger cloud are coagulations or gatherings of items that might become your main points of your speech. You will notice as you're doing research that different items seem to show up over and over. That when you're reading about electric cars, you're probably going to read quite a bit, for example, about batteries. And you might read a lot about comparison of gas mileage to miles per hour or per charge, and distance of how far you can drive. But different topics keep coming up over and over in your research, and that might be a clue that would be a good idea for a main point. Maybe not. You don't have to do it that way, but that might be an indicator saying maybe I should do a main point on the batteries of electric cars, or the weight of electric cars, because I'm assuming the less they weigh, the more miles they will get. So, and maybe you'll do one of your points will be Tesla or GM or whoever are actually making the cars, the companies who are making the cars. But it's the different ideas. Then I'm showing how those ideas, then your main points that are coming out of your research, are then going to come down and become your main points. And I picture the main points as baskets, in that baskets can hold information, right? And so we have the 3 baskets. Now, I want you to also notice that the reason I use baskets is because what goes in one basket is not going to go in another basket. They are clear and distinct from one another, and that's why I have them. And that's what the lines between them are, just to emphasize there are 3 specific clear baskets of information, or 3 clear distinct main points. And that's what you want to make sure, is that your points are clear and distinct from one another, so it's not confusing. This next picture kind of is what I see in some speeches, that I have one that's supposed to say 1 or 2. And sometimes as the listener, I cannot tell if they have what they just talked about was 1 main point or 2. Did they break into 2 distinct points somewhere in there? I could never tell. Third one, maybe I could tell, but 1 and 2, I couldn't tell. So make sure they are clear and distinct from one another. Now, when you have your main points, and we're going to talk about how many main points you should have in a few moments, but what order should they go in? And if maybe let's say you have 3 main points, you have one, for example, that's most important, most significant, most exciting, most fun, medium, and least important. So what does research tell us? Well, research says that you can put them, most to least, you could put them least to most, or you could even try a middle ground of your 2 lesser points on the outside and your most important point in the middle. Research tells us that the first one of your most important point being first, or your most important point being last, research shows support either way. What they do conclude, however, is you do not want to put your most important point in the middle. It doesn't work as well. And so it kind of gets lost in there. So make your most important first, or most important last. Sometimes it's a chronological issue, and it really doesn't, you don't have the privilege of putting first, or if you're going to do, for example, Abraham Lincoln, his early life is going to go first. That may not be the most exciting, but it's always going to go first. And maybe your last point is his assassination, which is what where the most fascination is with him. But that's still going to be third if you do a chronological order. But we'll talk more about that. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about symbols, numbering your speech. And we use a standard format of numbering in our preparation outline or our formal outline. So we just said we come up with our main points, and I said baskets, and they will say that you want to have between 2 and 5 main points. If you have less than that, it's just one big paragraph. If you have more than 5, it starts to get confusing, and your audience will not remember your points. And remember, we are audience centered, so it's easier to remember less points for our audience. So we only have no more than 5. 3 seems to be best. It's what we're used to. It seems to be fairly easy for us to remember. So I would always encourage 3 main points, but you have a little bit of leeway there. Now notice how the symbolization is laid out in terms of Roman numeral 1, capital A, Arabic 1, and then a lowercase a, and then it goes down on from there. And notice also how they are indented. And this kind of shows us, just by looking at an outline of a paper, we know what the big stuff is, the most important main points, and we know the minor detailed stuff. As the further it gets indented, then the more detail it is, and probably less important. The main points are the most important items. And then the symbols and the format of your outline tell the story. And here's something to remember: if you have a 1 or an A or a Arabic 1 or a lowercase a, you should always have another one that goes with it, a 2, a B, a 2, or B. You never have a single point or subpoint or sub-subpoint, just a or just a 1. You always have a parallel that goes with it. Now, in terms of symbol and spacing, here's what it looks like. Here's their suggestion of an outline. You see the Roman numeral 1, that's a main point. Then the lowercase a, and then a lower 1 and 2. There would also have to be a B with this to make it do it right, but it should look something like that. So you see how it indents in. It's a brief example there. A format, as I mentioned before, refers to the indenting of your speech, and you are showing the relationships of the points and ideas of what level they are at and how important or less important they are based on how far indented they are. But parallel ideas line up with one another. The rule of division, I just kind of went through this. When you divide something in general, this is mathematics as well as speaking. When you divide something, the minimal number of pieces you're going to have are 2, correct? So if you divide it. And so, like I said before, if you have a 1 or an A or a 1, you're always going to have a 2 or a B or a 2, or a UPOO, as I say there. UPOO should have a 2. So don't just leave a subpoint, sub-subpoint all by itself with just a lowercase a without a B. You always have at least 2. And the way it's like, well, I don't know how to fix that. Well, either you have to push the information back into the previous point or subpoint, or break a point or subpoint or a sub-subpoint into 2 parts and not just leave it at 1. So either way, push it back or break it into multiple pieces. The rule of distinction, and this is my comment: make sure that your main points are clear and distinct from each other. Think of the baskets: clear, distinct, separated. Everybody can tell what they are from one another. Don't leave us confused. This is where you want to give your speech to somebody before you give it in the official presentation and get feedback from them on things like, were my main points cleared? Could you tell how many main points that I had? Rule of parallel or similar wording. When it comes to your main points, you want to make sure that the 3 main points sound similar to one another, as it helps your audience clarify, oh yeah, I remember hearing him say a sentence like that earlier. They may not think that consciously, and so they'll kind of spot that the wording is a clue to help them know it's another point. Also, items like first, second, and third. First, let's talk about, for example, my example here, the origins of the Siberian Husky. Then you talk about that. Second, let's talk about the fur of the Siberian Husky. And third, let's talk about the habits of the Siberian Husky, like howling, running away, and tearing things up. Kind of a exciting road with a Husky. But do you see how they sound the same? And again, we're about the audience, helping them remember, and that's going to help them along the way. The rule of balance. Make sure that your main points are about the same length of time. You don't want a big first point and then a smaller second point. So you want to make sure you keep them about the same length, because otherwise it looks weird if you have, out of a 6-minute speech, your first main point is 4 minutes, your second main point is 2 minutes, and your third main point is like 30 seconds. It just looks weird. It doesn't sound right, and it makes your audience think the speaker did not put enough time into that third point. Did they run out of time, which means they didn't plan well? Did they not bother doing the extra work on that third point because they didn't care? But whichever it is, your credibility as a speaker is going to be at least mildly diminished because they consider that you did not do a good job of clarifying that third main point. So give them about the equal amount, a little bit of difference, but in a 6-minute speech, you have a 30-second introduction, 20-second conclusion, and you could then have about a minute to a minute and a half per point, and that balances out pretty well. And remember, as I said before, always think being audience-centered. There's an old phrase, I stole this from somebody else, but you're probably familiar that across the United States, we have radio stations or TV stations. East of the Mississippi River, they all start with a W. In the western part of the states, they start with a K. And so this comes from kind of an Eastern perspective. But this one author, a guy named John Maxwell, he said it this way: everybody listens to radio station WIIFM, which stands for What's in It for Me. So we are naturally selfish people, all of us, even the best of us. And we kind of think, what am I going to get out of this? Why should I bother listening? What does this speaker have to give me? So the reality is that's how they are. So we don't want to make them overwork on listening to our speech. So we want to be, they're already self-centered. We want to be audience-centered. So I guess that works out pretty well. So again, it's not about you giving a speech as much as it is your audience receiving a quality presentation. Okay, so I'm going to stop there for this video, and I'm going to start another one, and you'll be able to take a break here as well.